All right, so good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and individuals. Thanks to those of you who are joining live, and thanks to those of you who are watching the recording. I appreciate it. My name is Dr. Josh Franco, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Cuyamaca College. I am having the Global Conflict and Cooperation Workshop from Silver Strand State Beach in Imperial/Coronado here in San Diego County. So I'm kind of like tucked in my car in the back with the oceans in front of me. My in-laws are in town, so I needed to go and show them the beach because they live in Sacramento. They're like, it's 1,000 degrees there. We need to like cool off. We're like, okay, I appreciate you guys coming down. We try to do two things at the same time. So today we'll be talking about, I'm going to share my screen if I haven't done that yet. So Global Conflict and Cooperation is a workshop series that's focused on defining, exploring, and discussing global conflict and cooperation from the point of view of different international institutions, country governments, and international non-governmental organizations. Our series has been going on for the past now 5 weeks, entering week 6. So we covered the Summit of the Americas, Ukraine, oceans, NATO, Iran, and now today we'll be talking about Saudi Arabia. So let's go ahead and jump right to it. So here is a map of the country of Saudi Arabia. It is located on the Arabian Peninsula in the Middle East, a bridge between Asia and Africa, and to some extent Europe, but not so much central as other countries are. The capital is Riyadh, located here. And you'll see it borders a number of countries, so including Israel, Kuwait, Iraq, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, Yemen, slightly covered a little here, actually it's over here, and then Egypt and countries to the west. So our learning objectives with this workshop are the following. First is, by the end of this workshop, you should be able to first identify where Saudi Arabia is located. Secondly is explain a real-world example of conflict related to Saudi Arabia. And then lastly, explain a real-world example of cooperation related to Saudi Arabia. So a little bit about Saudi Arabia. Here's a political map of it. And again, Riyadh is the capital, and some of the major cities here on the west coast and on the east coast. And I'll point out these geographic features. So here on the west coast is the Red Sea, and not directly to the south, or at least bordering it, but south past Oman and Yemen is the Arabian Sea. And then here to the east is the Persian Gulf. And these are some major waterways where a lot of international cargo and traffic, particularly the oil lines that make their way from the Middle East to other parts of the world. So what we'll do is check out Saudi Arabia's CIA World Factbook. So let me go ahead and put a new share here. We'll pull up that monitor. So here's the CIA World Factbook. It's been a resource that's publicly available, and we'll go ahead and pull up the political part. So you see here a satellite image of the country or part of it, and then we'll go ahead and have this background read to us. A few paragraphs. I'm going to kind of start up, or start from the bottom, more recent times. So let me go ahead and play that. If I can get a thumbs up or a message in the chat that you can hear, that'd be wonderful.
The government held its first ever elections in 2005 and 2011, when Saudis went to the polls to elect municipal councillors. In December 2015, women were allowed to vote and stand as candidates for the first time in municipal council elections, with 19 women winning seats. After King Salman ascended to the throne in 2015, he placed the first next-generation prince, Mohammed bin Nayef bin Abd al-Aziz al Saud, in the line of succession as crown prince. He designated his son, Mohammed bin Salman bin Abd al-Aziz al Saud, as the deputy crown prince. In March 2015, Saudi Arabia led a coalition of 10 countries in a military campaign to restore the legitimate government of Yemen, which had been ousted by Houthi forces allied with former President Ali Abdullah al-Saleh. The war in Yemen has drawn international criticism for civilian casualties and its effect on the country's dire humanitarian situation. In December 2015, then Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman announced Saudi Arabia would lead a 34-nation Islamic coalition to fight terrorism. It has since grown to 41 nations. In May 2017, Saudi Arabia inaugurated the Global Center for Combating Extremist Ideology, also known as EDITL, as part of its ongoing efforts to counter violent extremism. In June 2017, King Salman elevated Mohammed bin Salman to crown prince. Since then, he has jockeyed for influence with neighboring countries in a bid to be the region's main power broker. The country remains a leading producer of oil and natural gas and holds about 17% of the world's proven oil reserves as of 2020. The government continues to pursue economic reform and diversification, particularly since Saudi Arabia's accession to the WTO in 2005, and promotes foreign investment in the kingdom. In April 2016, the Saudi government announced a broad set of socio-economic reforms, known as Vision 2030. Low global oil prices throughout 2015 and 2016 significantly lowered Saudi Arabia's governmental revenue. In response, the government cut subsidies on water, electricity, and gasoline, reduced government employee compensation packages, and announced limited new land taxes. In coordination with OPEC and some key non-OPEC countries, Saudi Arabia agreed to cut oil output in early 2017 to regulate supply and help elevate global prices. In early 2020, this agreement by the so-called OPEC Plus coalition collapsed. Saudi Arabia launched a price war by flooding the market with low-priced oil before returning to the negotiating table to agree to OPEC Plus's largest and longest-lasting output cut. This cut helped to buoy prices that had collapsed as a result of the price war and the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic.
So there you heard a bit about the politics of Saudi Arabia, particularly after its first ever elections in 2005 and 2011. And it's important to point out that the new Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, has served as the country's leader since 2017. And knowing that Saudi Arabia is an oil powerhouse in the world and its ability to maintain its reach through oil production or lack thereof is really important for what we'll be discussing next regarding conflict and cooperation. So let me go back to our slides. So that's a little bit about Saudi Arabia. So with respect to conflict, I'll point out here the Yemeni civil war from 2014 to present, and then Biden's recent trip to Saudi Arabia, with at least some prognosticators hoping that it would start to bring an end to the long-running conflict in the region. So let's go ahead and share that. So here's our Wikipedia page. I'm going to go ahead and have this first two paragraphs right here.
The Yemeni Civil War, Arabic, Romanized, Al-Arab al-Aliya al-Yemeniya, is an ongoing multilateral civil war that began in late 2014 mainly between the Abdurrahman Mansur Hadi-led Yemeni government and the Houthi armed movement, along with their supporters and allies. Both claim to constitute the official government of Yemen. 166. The civil war began in September 2014, when Houthi forces took over the capital city Sana'a, which was followed by a rapid Houthi takeover of the government. On the 21st of March 2015, the Houthi-led Supreme Revolutionary Committee declared a general mobilization to overthrow Hadi and expand their control by driving into southern provinces. 167. The Houthi offensive, allied with military forces loyal to Saleh, began fighting the next day in Lahij Governorate. By the 25th of March, Lahij fell to the Houthis and they reached the outskirts of Aden, the seat of power for Hadi's government. 168. Hadi fled the country the same day. 169. 170. Concurrently, a coalition led by Saudi Arabia launched military operations by using airstrikes to restore the former Yemeni government. 20. Although there was no direct intervention by Iran, who support the Houthis. 171. The conflict has been seen by Western sources as an extension of the Iran-Saudi Arabia proxy conflict, and as a means to combat Iranian influence in the region.
So as with any conflict, what we learned about the Yemeni civil war is that it seemed to be a natural or general civil war that's happened in this country. But once you start to look beyond the microscope and you look more broadly, what people have learned is that this basically has functioned as a proxy conflict between the country of Saudi Arabia and the country of Iran. And their intention is basically to say who has the power in the region, who is able to quote unquote, call the shots in the region, and how does this play out not only in the immediate term with respect to what's going on in Yemen, but how does this play out in the medium and then in the long term with growing the presence of either country's power base and reach across the region. So when we think of conflict, most of the times when we think of civil war, it's important to recognize that there is a human toll to this conflict. Thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, have been maimed or murdered or killed in this conflict that it's been enduring for almost a decade now, and that we can't just gloss over that people are suffering because it isn't just a possible lack of resolution by people within the country of Yemen, but that there's external forces or factors or governments or countries that are involved in perpetuating that conflict for their own interests as opposed to looking on behalf of the interests of the people who are there. So with any conflict, to say the least, it's sad and dire to see it happen. And the hope is that we continue to be more aware of it, and at least in this country, knowing that there are efforts to try to have the U.S. intervene in some meaningful way, but obviously not with their historic interventions with boots on the ground and troops there, but really about bringing greater attention to it to the domestic community here, but also abroad. The other thing I'd like to bring up is this president's trip to Saudi Arabia and how people viewed it as potentially helping in that conflict. So let me go ahead and share that screen. So this is the Brookings Institute, which is a very prominent Washington, D.C. think tank. And they have an article here about Biden's trip. So I'm gonna go ahead and have the first few sentences played for us, or paragraphs, I should say. Looks like I'm getting a couple of
When US President Joe Biden visits Saudi Arabia next month, he has an opportunity to advance his goal of ending the war in Yemen. Biden said early in his administration that ending the war is a top priority, a major and correct policy shift from his predecessors. In Jeddah, he can press Saudi King Salman and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to do more by lifting the remainder of the blockade of northern Yemen and making the truce permanent. Bruce Riedel, Senior Biden's team has already been very active in bringing the war to a truce, the first since 2016. It went into effect in April and has been renewed until August. It should now be renewed with no time limit. The ceasefire is most endangered by the continuing siege of Taiz, the country's third largest city, by the Houthi rebels. The Houthis have offered to open back roads into the city but not the main thoroughfares. The Zaydi Shia Houthis rejected a compromise proposal from the United Nations last week in talks in Amman, Jordan. Biden can encourage the Saudis to offer incentives to get a deal to fully open Taiz. The biggest incentives would be further easing of the Saudi blockade of the Houthi-controlled north. More fuel should be allowed into Hodeidah, the main port, as well as unlimited amounts of food, medicine, and other humanitarian supplies. The ceasefire has also opened the airport in Sana'a to commercial flights to Amman and Cairo, Egypt. It should be open to other destinations and facilitate more flights for Yemenis seeking medical assistance. Yemen's own health infrastructure has been devastated by the war.
So this article goes on to describe the humanitarian toll of this conflict and how the president's worked with different organizations and countries in the region, or at least communicated with them about why you want to resolve this conflict. And it's important to note that the U.S. has always been seen as a player around the world. And even if it's a conflict that it's not directly involved in this case, it's an example of how conflict will garner the attention of the United States and at least in this case, the president seeking to try to intervene in some fashion. So next, let's explore some examples of cooperation. And what I'd like to pull up here is this press release by the U.S. State Department or Department of State on the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia signing what they call the Artemis Accords. Let me go ahead and pull that up. So I'm excited to share this example because when we think of conflict and cooperation, most of the times we're like, thinking of wars or, treaties, and mostly here, like related to the oceans or to agricultural production or trade and things like that. But this one's pretty cool because it's related to space exploration. So let me go ahead and have this paragraph read to us. At least two paragraphs, I should say.
The United States welcomes Saudi Arabia's signing of the Artemis Accords on July 14, affirming its commitment to safe, sustainable, and responsible space exploration. Mohammed Saud Al Tamimi, CEO of the Saudi Space Commission, signed the accords on behalf of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and was joined during a virtual ceremony by Her Royal Highness Princess Rima bint Bandar bin Sultan bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, Ambassador to the United States, Abdullah bin Amir Al Swaha, Saudi Minister of Communications and Information Technology, Bill Nelson, Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, Martina Strong, Chargé d'Affaires for the United States Mission to Saudi Arabia, and Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Jennifer Littlejohn from the Department of State Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs. The principles of the Artemis Accords, grounded in the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, advance the NASA-led Artemis program, which will put the first woman and first person of color on the moon and prepare the way for a human mission to Mars. Artemis relies on a broad and diverse international coalition, working together to achieve an historic and ambitious vision for human space exploration.
So what you heard there is that the United States is building this international coalition to support the Artemis missions. And what's exciting about this is, first, bringing in countries that haven't traditionally been a part of space exploration, or at least aren't perceived to be involved in space exploration. So it's kind of broadening the inspiration that space exploration provides to not just the communities that are, or the countries that are involved, but newer countries that are wanting to be involved. Secondly, the necessity of the scientific and technological development and the advancement of knowledge that comes with exploring space, and knowing that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia wants to be a partner in that process with their own universities and their own researchers contributing how and where they can to space exploration. And then lastly, when you hear about the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, it's really this idea that you want to have peaceful exploration of space and cooperative exploration of space. You don't want this done in a conflictual way, because obviously space is huge, and there's only a handful of spacefaring nations thus far. But as we start to develop more advanced technologies, reduce the cost of going into space through rockets and reusable rockets, and lowering cost of fuel, and just people realizing that there's a whole universe out there that we want to learn about and uncover its secrets, that working together is going to be the way that happens across countries. So last, I'd like to talk about the implications. So let's go ahead and get to our last part of our slides here. So what are some implications of this, the country of Saudi Arabia and conflict and cooperation? And I'll just point out two things here about President Biden arriving in the Saudi Arabia, Jeddah, and then his remarks in Saudi Arabia. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull up his remarks. And let me go ahead and share that screen here. Close some of these windows. So there might be an ad, but let me get this.
Creating contact forms on WordPress can be a huge pain. Who wants to deal with complicated software, extra coding?
Okay, so this should get started in a few moments. If you can give me a thumbs up that you can hear the sound.
From Israel, President Biden traveled to Saudi Arabia, where he was greeted by the Saudi Crown Prince.
Okay,
After meeting him and other Saudi
audio.
leaders, the president held a brief news
know if that
conference where he
changes
was
the logo.
asked about the Crown Prince's alleged involvement with the 2018 murder of
that better?
Jamal Khashoggi.
I know it's late, but thank you for being here. Had a good series of meetings. Just finished more than 2 hours meetings with Saudi leadership here in Jeddah, meeting with the king for about a little over half an hour, working session with the Crown Prince and all the ministers, from the energy minister to the sports minister, all the way down the line, and got the chance to talk to basically the entire Saudi government. And thanks to many months of quiet diplomacy by the staff, we've accomplished some significant business today. First, As you saw this morning, the Saudis will open their airspace to all civilian carriers. That is a big deal, a big deal. Not only symbolically, but substantively, it's a big deal. It means Saudi airspace is now open to flights to and from Israel. This is the first tangible step on the path of what I hope will eventually be a broader normalization of relations. Second, we concluded a historic deal that to transform a flashpoint at the heart of the Middle East wars into an area of peace. International peacekeepers, including U.S. troops, will leave Tiran Island in the Red Sea, where they've been for over 40 years since the Camp David Accords. 5 American soldiers died on this strategically located island in 2020, and it's important to remember them today. Now, thanks to this breakthrough, this island will be open to tourism and economic development while retaining all necessary security arrangements and the present freedom of navigation of all parties, including Israel. Third, we agreed to work together to deepen and extend the Yemen ceasefire. And you know there's carnage been in Yemen of late. And it's been in place more than 3 months, resulting in the most peaceful period in Yemen in 7 years. We further agreed to pursue a diplomatic process to achieve a wider settlement in Yemen. The Saudi leadership also committed to continue to facilitate the delivery of food and humanitarian goods to civilians. In this context, we discussed Saudi Arabia's security needs to defend the kingdom, given very real threats from Iran and Iran's proxies. Fourth,
So the president goes on to describe the efforts of the United States to obviously address some enduring issues like the civil war in Yemen, and then some newer issues like establishing civilian air travel between Saudi Arabia and the country of Israel, and ultimately working to develop a greater strategic partnership with the country of Saudi Arabia. Now, this isn't without controversy. You might have seen in the video, there was a fist bump there. That garnered a lot of attention in the domestic press here in the United States because there was a Washington Post reporter who was murdered, and many people point to the Crown Prince as directing that conflict or directing that attack. And so when we think about all the actions that need to be taken and the implications of it, knowing that Saudi Arabia is at the center of a strategic and very strategically important region and culturally rich region in the country, it's about bringing together different interests, interacting in complex ways, and realizing that the institutions that can help to remedy and address these challenges only come with time and effort and energy. So with that, I appreciate you taking the time to listen in. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and I'll stop the recording and take any questions, and then we'll call it a night. So take care and have a great evening.